Maria Santos had never imagined her life would lead her to a military mess hall in the mountains of Afghanistan. At 28, she was supposed to be running her family's restaurant back in San Antonio, Texas. Instead, she found herself stirring a massive pot of beef stew at 0500 hours, preparing breakfast for Navy SEALs who would soon head out on another dangerous mission. The morning air was crisp and thin at the remote forward operating base. Maria had volunteered for this deployment 6 months ago, when the military desperately needed experienced cooks willing to serve in combat zones. Her culinary school training and years of managing her family's busy restaurant made her perfect for feeding elite soldiers who needed proper nutrition to stay sharp and strong. She moved efficiently around the kitchen, her hands working automatically as she prepared eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. The smell of coffee brewing filled the air, mixing with the aroma of her homemade salsa that had become legendary among the troops. The SEALs always joked that Maria's cooking was worth fighting for, but she knew they were just being kind to the civilian contractor who worked alongside them. Through the small window above the prep station, Maria could see the sun beginning to rise over the jagged mountain peaks. The base was quiet except for the usual sounds of early morning activity. Guards walked their posts along the perimeter fence, and she could hear the distant hum of generators providing power to the essential buildings. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison entered the mess hall first, as he did every morning. He was the team leader, a man in his mid-30s with serious gray eyes and a respectful manner toward everyone on base, regardless of rank or position. Behind him came the rest of Alpha Team, 12 of the most elite warriors in the world. Yet they always thanked Maria for her meals and asked about her family back home. "Morning, Maria," Jake said, accepting his usual black coffee and plate of eggs over easy. "Smells incredible in here, as always." "Good morning, Commander," Maria replied with a warm smile. "I made extra bacon today. Figured you boys might need the energy for whatever adventure you have planned." The team settled at their usual tables, the conversation flowing easily between operational briefings and friendly banter. Maria continued working, preparing lunch portions that would be packed for their mission. She had learned not to ask too many questions about where they were going or when they would return. Military operations required secrecy, and she respected that boundary completely. Sergeant First Class Tommy Chen, the team's communications specialist, approached the serving counter with his empty coffee cup. He was barely 25 but had already served 3 combat deployments. Maria had grown fond of his easy smile and the way he always helped clear tables after meals. "Maria, you ever think about opening a restaurant when you get back to the States?" Tommy asked, refilling his cup from the large coffee pot. "I already have one," Maria laughed. "My family's been running Santos Kitchen for 15 years. My abuela started it with nothing but her recipes and determination. Well, when I get out of the Navy, I'm driving straight to San Antonio for some real Santos cooking," Tommy promised. The team finished breakfast and began gathering their gear. Maria watched them check weapons, adjust tactical vests, and review mission documents. These men had become like family to her over the past months. She worried about them every time they left the base, though she tried not to show it. As they prepared to leave, Jake approached the kitchen one more time. "Maria, we should be back by 1800 hours tomorrow. Nothing too complicated this time, just a routine patrol and some intel gathering in the valley. I'll have your favorite dinner waiting," Maria promised. "That chicken and rice dish you like so much." "You're too good to us," Jake said, then paused at the doorway. "Hey, Maria, if anything happens while we're gone, anything at all that seems unusual, you get to the communications center immediately. Promise me." Maria felt a small chill at his serious tone, but she nodded. "Of course, Commander. But nothing's going to happen. This place is locked down tight." After the team departed, Maria continued her usual routine. She cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, prepared ingredients for lunch service, and started a large batch of soup that would simmer all day. The base maintained a skeleton crew during team operations, mostly support personnel, medics, and guards. Around noon, Maria was kneading dough for fresh dinner rolls when she noticed something odd. The usual radio chatter from the guard posts had gone quiet. The communications center, which normally buzzed with activity, seemed unusually still. She paused in her work, flour covering her hands, and listened carefully to the sounds around her. The silence stretched on, broken only by the wind whistling through the mountain passes and the steady hum of machinery. Maria wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside the mess hall. The guard tower that should have had 2 soldiers visible was empty. Her heart began to race as she realized she couldn't see any personnel moving around the base. She walked quickly toward the communications building, her mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe there had been a drill she hadn't been informed about, or perhaps everyone was dealing with some technical issue. But deep in her gut, Maria knew something was very wrong. The communications center door stood slightly open, which was strictly against protocol. Maria approached cautiously and peered inside. The radio equipment was still running, but there was no one at the stations. Papers were scattered across the floor, and one of the chairs was overturned. Maria's military contractor training kicked in. She remembered the emergency procedures she had been taught, but hoped never to use. Her first priority was to attempt contact with Alpha Team and report the situation. She sat down at the main radio console and picked up the microphone with shaking hands. "Alpha Team, this is Base Kitchen, do you copy?" "Over," she whispered into the radio. Static filled the airwaves. Maria tried again, louder this time, using the proper call signs and frequencies she had memorized. Still nothing but static responded to her calls. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was alone on a military base in hostile territory, with no communication to the outside world, and no idea what had happened to the personnel who should have been protecting the facility. The 12 SEALs she cooked for every day were somewhere in the mountains, unaware that their safe haven had been compromised. Maria Santos, the restaurant owner from San Antonio, who just wanted to serve good food to brave soldiers, was about to discover strength she never knew she possessed. Maria forced herself to stay calm as she examined the communications equipment more carefully. Years of managing a busy restaurant had taught her to think clearly under pressure, and right now she needed every bit of that training. She found the emergency manual tucked behind the main radio console and flipped through it with trembling fingers. The procedures were clear but terrifying. If the base was compromised and communication with command was impossible, she was supposed to destroy sensitive equipment and attempt to reach a predetermined evacuation point 15 kilometers away. But Maria couldn't leave, not when Alpha Team would return expecting safety and support. She tried the radio again, this time using different frequencies and emergency channels. On the 4th attempt, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize were coming through on one of the tactical frequencies. The tone was urgent and coordinated, like people planning something important. Maria quickly turned down the volume and listened carefully. Although she couldn't understand the words, the disciplined communication patterns reminded her of the way Jake's team coordinated their operations. These weren't random insurgents stumbling around the base. This was an organized military force that had taken control of the facility. Moving as quietly as possible, Maria left the communications center and made her way back toward the mess hall. She needed to gather supplies and figure out how to help Alpha Team when they returned. The base layout was burned into her memory after months of walking between buildings, and she used that knowledge to stay in the shadows. From her position behind the mess hall, Maria could see movement near the main gate. At least 6 figures in military-style clothing were positioned around the entrance, but they weren't wearing the familiar uniforms of American forces. Her heart pounded as she realized that enemy fighters had not only infiltrated the base, but had taken complete control of it. The fate of the American personnel who should have been on duty became horrifyingly clear. Maria spotted several bodies near the guard posts, and she had to cover her mouth to keep from crying out. These were people she had served meals to, joked with, and considered friends. Now they were gone, victims of what appeared to be a carefully planned attack. Maria crawled back into the mess hall through the rear service entrance, her mind racing with possibilities. She had maybe 6 hours before Alpha Team returned from their mission. 6 hours to figure out how to warn them that their safe haven had become a trap. 6 hours to somehow help 12 elite warriors avoid walking into an ambush that would certainly kill them all. In the storage room behind the kitchen, Maria found her emergency pack that all personnel were required to maintain. It contained basic survival supplies, a flare gun, and a handheld radio with limited range. She also grabbed the largest kitchen knives she could find, feeling foolish but determined to have some way to defend herself. The sound of footsteps outside the mess hall made her freeze. Voices approached, speaking that same foreign language she had heard on the radio. Maria quickly hid behind a large freezer unit, clutching a knife and trying to control her breathing. 3 armed men entered the mess hall, their weapons ready, and eyes scanning every corner. They moved like professionals, checking potential hiding spots and examining the kitchen equipment. One of them said something that made the others laugh, and Maria guessed they were making comments about the American food or the woman who had been cooking it. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the men left the mess hall and continued their patrol of the base. Maria remained hidden, waiting until she was certain they were gone before moving again. She realized that staying in the mess hall was too dangerous. She needed a better hiding spot, somewhere she could observe the base and plan her next moves. The supply bunker built into the hillside behind the base offered the best option. It was partially underground, had multiple exits, and contained enough food and water to last for days if necessary. More importantly, it had a clear view of the main approach route that Alpha Team would use when returning from their mission. Maria carefully gathered essential supplies from the mess hall, including her emergency radio, the flare gun, several bottles of water, and some non-perishable food. She also took the base's emergency medical kit and a pair of binoculars she found in the operations office. The journey to the supply bunker required crossing 50 meters of open ground. Maria waited until the patrol had moved to the far side of the base, then sprinted across the exposed area as fast as she could. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached the bunker entrance and quickly ducked inside. The bunker was dark and cold, but it felt infinitely safer than the exposed buildings. Maria used a small flashlight to navigate to the observation post built into the front wall. Through the narrow window, she could see most of the base and the valley approach where Alpha Team would appear. As evening approached, Maria attempted to contact the SEALs using her handheld radio. The range was limited, but if they were close enough to the base, she might be able to reach them. She whispered into the device using call signs and code words she had overheard during their briefings. Alpha Leader, this is Kitchen Base. Emergency Protocol 7. Do not approach home base. Repeat, do not approach home base. Kitchen Base to Alpha Leader, please respond. Only Static answered her calls, but she kept trying every 10 minutes. Somewhere out in those mountains, 12 of America's finest warriors were heading toward what they thought was safety. They had no idea that their trusted base had been turned into a killing ground, and their friend Maria was the only person who could warn them. As darkness fell over the mountains, Maria saw lights moving around the base. The enemy force was larger than she had initially thought, with at least 15 fighters visible from her position. They had set up positions covering all the approaches to the base, created overlapping fields of fire, and positioned heavy weapons to maximize their advantage. This wasn't just an attack. It was a carefully planned ambush designed to capture or kill Alpha Team when they returned. The enemy knew about the SEAL Team's mission schedule, their expected return time, and their standard approach routes. Someone had provided detailed intelligence about American operations in the area. Maria realized with growing horror that Alpha Team was walking into a trap that would destroy them completely. 12 elite warriors against 15 or more enemies in prepared positions, with no warning and no backup. It would be a massacre. But Maria Santos hadn't come this far to watch good men die. She had served these soldiers for months, shared stories about family and dreams for the future, and grown to care about them like brothers. They had always treated her with respect and kindness, and now it was her turn to protect them. She checked her watch. Alpha Team would return in less than 4 hours. 4 hours to somehow warn them, disrupt the ambush, or find a way to even the odds. 4 hours for a restaurant owner from Texas to become a warrior. Maria spent the first hour carefully studying the enemy positions through her binoculars. Years of managing kitchen operations had taught her to observe details and identify patterns, skills that now served her in this deadly situation. The enemy fighters moved in predictable patterns, changing guard positions every 30 minutes and maintaining radio contact with coordinated check-ins. She counted 17 fighters total, armed with assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and at least one heavy machine gun positioned to cover the main approach road. They had also placed explosive devices along the route Alpha Team would normally take, turning the familiar path into a deadly trap. The enemy commander appeared to be a tall man with a distinctive red headscarf, who positioned himself near the communications building. He carried himself with authority and coordinated the ambush positions with military precision. Maria realized this wasn't a random attack by local insurgents. This was a professional military operation designed specifically to eliminate Alpha Team. As the second hour passed, Maria continued trying to reach the SEALs on her handheld radio. She varied the frequencies and tried different call signs, but the mountains seemed to be blocking her transmissions. The radio's limited range meant she would need to get much closer to the team's position to make contact, which would require leaving the safety of her bunker. The thought of venturing into the mountains alone terrified her, but Maria knew it might be the only way to save the men she had grown to care about. She began planning a route that would take her around the base perimeter and toward the valley where Alpha Team would be approaching. It would be dangerous, but staying hidden while 12 good men walked into certain death was not an option. Maria gathered her essential supplies into a small backpack. She included the handheld radio, extra batteries, the flare gun with 3 flares, a flashlight, water, and some energy bars from the kitchen supplies. She also took one of the large kitchen knives and the base's first aid kit, hoping she wouldn't need either one. Before leaving the bunker, Maria tried one more time to raise Alpha Team on the radio. This time, instead of using proper military protocols, she tried a more personal approach that might get their attention if they were monitoring communications. "Jake, this is Maria from the kitchen," she whispered into the radio. "If you can hear this, don't come home yet. Bad people are waiting for you. I'm going to try to find you. Stay away from the base until you hear from me again." The words felt inadequate for the desperate situation, but Maria hoped that hearing her voice instead of military call signs might make the transmission more memorable if it reached them. She repeated the message 3 times, then secured the radio in her backpack and prepared to leave the bunker. The night air was cold and sharp as Maria slipped out of the bunker's rear exit. She had memorized the enemy patrol patterns and timed her movement to avoid the guard rotations. The darkness provided cover, but it also made navigation treacherous on the rocky mountain terrain. Maria moved slowly and carefully, using landmarks she had observed during her months at the base. The mess hall's ventilation fan, the distinctive shape of the water tower, and the communications antenna helped her maintain direction as she circled wide around the enemy positions. Every sound seemed amplified in the thin mountain air, and she constantly worried that her footsteps would alert the guards. After an hour of careful movement, Maria reached a ridge overlooking the valley approach route. From this position, she could see several kilometers down the mountain path that Alpha Team would use for their return journey. She also had better line of sight for radio communications, free from the interference of the base's metal buildings. Maria set up her observation post behind a cluster of large rocks that provided both concealment and protection. She arranged her supplies within easy reach and adjusted the radio to scan multiple frequencies. If Alpha Team was monitoring communications as they approached the base, she should be able to detect their signals from this position. The waiting was agony. Every minute that passed brought the SEALs closer to the ambush, and Maria still had no way to contact them. She tried the radio every 10 minutes, varying her message but maintaining the urgent warning about the compromised base. Her voice grew hoarse from the dry mountain air and the stress of the situation. Around midnight, Maria heard something that made her heart race with hope. Faint voices carrying on the wind from somewhere down in the valley. She couldn't make out words, but the sound pattern reminded her of the quiet coordination she had heard from Alpha Team during their morning briefings. They might be closer than she had hoped. Maria increased her radio attempts, broadcasting warnings every few minutes and listening carefully for any response. She also prepared one of her emergency flares, ready to signal the team's location if necessary. The flare would certainly alert the enemy to her presence, but it might also save the lives of 12 elite warriors. Then, at 01:30 hours, Maria heard the sound she had been desperately hoping for. Jake's voice came through the radio static, faint but unmistakable. "Kitchen base, this is Alpha Leader. Maria, is that really you? What's your status?" "Over." Maria nearly sobbed with relief as she grabbed the radio. "Jake, thank God you can hear me. Don't come to the base. It's been taken over. There are at least 17 enemy fighters waiting in ambush positions. They killed everyone else and they're waiting for you to come back." There was a long pause before Jake's voice returned, much more serious and professional. "Maria, we copy your warning. What's your current position? Are you safe?" "I'm in the mountains about 2 kilometers from base on the ridge overlooking your normal approach route. I can see their positions from here. They have heavy weapons and explosives set up along the path." "Outstanding work, Maria. Stay exactly where you are. We're going to need your eyes on the target. Can you give us detailed information about enemy positions?" Maria felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. These elite warriors were treating her like a valued member of their team, trusting her observations to plan their response. She had gone from being the person who served their meals to being their eyes and ears in a combat situation. "I can see everything from here," Maria reported. "They have a machine gun position at the main gate, snipers in the guard towers, and at least 6 fighters with rifles positioned around the perimeter. The commander appears to be operating from the communications building." "Roger that. Maria, you've just saved our lives. We're going to move to a better position and figure out how to take back our base. Keep monitoring their movements and report any changes. And Maria, you're one hell of a brave woman." For the first time in hours, Maria allowed herself to smile. Alpha Team was safe. They knew about the ambush and they were counting on her to help them plan their counterattack. The restaurant owner from San Antonio had become a critical part of a military operation, and she was determined not to let her team down. Over the next 2 hours, Maria maintained constant communication with Alpha Team while they repositioned themselves around the base perimeter. Jake had split his 12-man team into 3 groups of 4, each taking positions that would allow them to attack the enemy from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria's elevated position made her the perfect coordinator for the operation. "Alpha Leader, this is Kitchen Base," Maria whispered into her radio. "The guard rotation just happened again. The machine gunner is taking a break and someone else is manning the weapon. This might be your best chance to neutralize that position." "Copy that, Kitchen Base. Bravo Team is moving into position now. Keep us posted on any movement near the communications building." Maria watched through her binoculars as shadowy figures moved silently through the darkness below. Even knowing where to look, she could barely make out the SEALs as they approached their targets. These men were masters of stealth and precision, turning the tables on an enemy that thought they held all the advantages. The first phase of the counterattack began at 0347 hours. Maria saw a brief muzzle flash near the main gate, followed immediately by the heavy machine gun falling silent. One of the enemy fighters tried to raise an alarm, but he was silenced before he could complete his warning call. "Kitchen Base, Phase 1 complete," came Jake's quiet voice over the radio. "Bravo Team has the main gate. Any movement from the communications building?" Maria focused her binoculars on the enemy command position. "Negative, Alpha Leader. The commander is still inside with 2 other fighters. They don't seem to know anything happened yet." "Roger. Charlie Team is moving on the guard towers. Delta Team will take the communications building on your signal." Maria watched as more enemy positions fell silent one by one. The SEALs moved like ghosts through the base, using their superior training and the element of surprise to systematically eliminate the ambush force. Years of working together had created a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, but the enemy wasn't completely unprepared. As Charlie Team approached the North Guard Tower, one of the sentries spotted movement and opened fire. The sharp crack of assault rifle rounds echoed across the base, and suddenly the entire enemy force was alert and responding to the attack. "Contact! Contact!" came Tommy Chen's voice over the radio. "Charlie Team is pinned down at the North Tower. We need support." Maria watched as muzzle flashes erupted across the base like deadly fireworks. The enemy fighters who had survived the initial assault were now fighting back with desperate intensity, knowing they were facing elite American forces in their element. The carefully planned ambush had turned into a chaotic firefight. "Kitchen Base, can you see the enemy positions engaging Charlie Team?" Jake's voice was calm despite the gunfire in the background. Maria studied the situation through her binoculars, her heart pounding as she watched tracer rounds streak through the darkness. "Alpha Leader, I see 3 enemy fighters on the roof of the barracks building. They have a clear shot at Charlie Team's position." "Copy that. Can you give us an exact location?" "Southwest corner of the barracks roof behind the ventilation unit. They're using the cover to pin down your men." "Outstanding. Delta Team, you heard Kitchen Base. Take out that position." Maria watched as 2 SEALs appeared like shadows on the opposite side of the barracks building. They moved up the exterior wall using climbing techniques she had never imagined possible, then crossed the roof silently behind the enemy fighters. The threat to Charlie Team was eliminated in seconds. The firefight continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Alpha Team had superior training, better coordination, and the advantage of Maria's overwatch position providing real-time intelligence. One by one, the enemy positions fell silent until only sporadic gunfire echoed across the base. "Kitchen Base, this is Alpha Leader. Jake's voice came through the radio, slightly out of breath but confident. "We've secured the base. 11 enemy fighters down, 6 captured. You can come home now." Maria felt tears streaming down her face as she packed up her equipment. The relief was overwhelming, mixed with pride and exhaustion from the most intense night of her life. She had helped save 12 elite warriors and reclaim their base from a professional enemy force. The journey back down the mountain seemed to take forever. Maria's legs shook with fatigue and adrenaline, and she had to stop several times to rest and rehydrate. As she approached the base perimeter, she could see Alpha Team members securing the area and treating wounded prisoners according to the rules of war. Jake Morrison met her at the main gate, his tactical gear dusty and his face showing the strain of combat, but his smile was genuine and warm. "Maria Santos, you are officially the most valuable non-combatant in military history. You saved our lives tonight." "I just did what anyone would do," Maria replied, though she knew that wasn't true. Most people would have hidden in the bunker and hoped for the best. She had chosen to risk everything to save people she cared about. "No," Jake said seriously. "Most people would have panicked, tried to run, or just hidden until it was over. You stayed calm, gathered intelligence, maintained communications, and provided tactical support throughout the entire operation. You fought alongside us tonight." Tommy Chen approached with a wide grin on his face. "Maria, when I said I was going to drive to San Antonio for your cooking, I didn't mention I was bringing the whole team. After tonight, we're all family." The other team members gathered around, each offering their thanks and respect for what Maria had done. These elite warriors, men who had faced death countless times in service to their country, were treating her as an equal and a hero. It was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria found herself back in her familiar mess hall kitchen. The routine of preparing coffee and breakfast felt surreal after the night's events, but it also felt like coming home. The base would be reinforced and security protocols would be reviewed. But for now, Alpha Team was safe and the immediate threat had been eliminated. Maria had learned that she possessed courage and capabilities she never knew existed, and she had earned the respect of some of America's finest warriors. But as she started the coffee and began preparing eggs for breakfast, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. 3 days after the base assault, Maria was kneading bread dough when Jake Morrison entered the mess hall with a serious expression she had learned to recognize. Behind him walked 2 men in clean uniforms who clearly weren't part of Alpha Team. Their pressed fatigues and polished boots marked them as command personnel from a larger base. "Maria, we need to talk," Jake said quietly. "These gentlemen are from Joint Special Operations Command. They have some questions about what happened here." The taller officer, a colonel with silver hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Ms. Santos, I'm Colonel David Harrison. I want to personally thank you for your actions during the assault. Your courage saved the lives of an entire SEAL team and preserved critical intelligence assets." Maria wiped flour from her hands, feeling uncomfortable with the formal attention. "I just did what needed to be done, Colonel. Anyone would have helped their friends." "Actually, that's not true," the colonel replied. "Our behavioral analysts estimate that less than 5% of civilians would have responded the way you did. Most would have attempted to flee or hidden until the situation resolved itself. Your decision to actively engage in supporting combat operations was extraordinary." The second officer, a major with an intelligence insignia, opened a folder and consulted some documents. "Ms. Santos, we've been analyzing the intelligence gathered from the captured enemy fighters. What we've learned is disturbing and requires your continued assistance." Jake pulled out a chair for Maria, and she sat down reluctantly. The serious expressions on all 3 men made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "What kind of assistance?" Colonel Harrison sat across from her, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. The enemy force that attacked this base was part of a larger network, planning coordinated strikes against American positions throughout the region. They had detailed intelligence about Alpha Team's operations, mission schedules, and personnel assignments. "We have a serious security breach somewhere in the command structure," the major added. "Someone with high-level access has been providing operational intelligence to enemy forces. This wasn't a random attack, it was a targeted assassination attempt." Maria felt cold despite the warm kitchen air. "What does this have to do with me? I'm just a cook." "You're the only person who witnessed the attack, gathered intelligence on enemy capabilities, and survived to provide testimony. Colonel Harrison explained. More importantly, the enemy doesn't know you exist. According to their intelligence, this base should have had only military personnel. They have no idea there was a civilian contractor who could identify their methods and capabilities. Jake leaned forward, his expression concerned. Maria, they want you to help identify the security breach. There's going to be an investigation involving multiple bases and command structures. Your observations about enemy tactics and equipment could help them trace the source of the leaked information. The Major opened his folder wider, revealing photographs and documents. We also need you to identify the enemy commander you observed. We believe he may be a high-value target who's been coordinating attacks across the entire theater of operations. Maria studied the photographs spread across the table. Most showed men in various military uniforms or civilian clothes, but one image immediately caught her attention. It was the tall man with the red headscarf who had coordinated the ambush from the communications building. That's him, Maria said, pointing at the photograph. He was definitely in charge. The other fighters reported to him, and he positioned all the ambush sites. The Major and Colonel exchanged significant looks. Ms. Santos, you've just identified Rahman al-Qassar, one of the most wanted terrorist operatives in the region. He's been responsible for at least 12 attacks on coalition forces, and we've been hunting him for over 2 years. The fact that he personally led this operation confirms how important Alpha Team was to his network, Colonel Harrison added. Someone gave him specific intelligence about the team's value and vulnerability. We need to find that source before more American lives are lost. Jake reached across the table and placed his hand over Maria's. They're asking you to extend your deployment and work directly with the intelligence team. It would mean leaving the kitchen and taking on a completely different role. The request felt overwhelming. Maria had signed up to cook meals for soldiers, not to become involved in counterintelligence operations. The events of the past few days had already pushed her far beyond anything she had imagined when she volunteered for deployment. I don't know anything about intelligence work, Maria protested. I'm not trained for this kind of thing. Actually, you've already demonstrated exactly the skills we need, the Major replied. You observe details, remember patterns, stay calm under pressure, and think strategically about complex situations. Those are the core requirements for intelligence analysis. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression understanding but firm. Ms. Santos, we're not going to order you to do this. You're a civilian contractor, and you have the right to complete your original assignment and return home. But I want you to understand what's at stake. The colonel pulled out a map marked with red symbols scattered across the region. These represent attacks on American positions over the past 6 months. The pattern suggests coordinated intelligence gathering and systematic targeting of our most effective units. If we don't identify and stop the security breach, more teams like Alpha will walk into ambushes. Maria studied the map, seeing the scope of the threat for the first time. The red symbols formed a pattern that spoke of careful planning and inside knowledge. Somewhere in the American command structure, someone was providing information that was getting soldiers killed. How long would you need me to stay? Maria asked quietly. 6 weeks, maybe 8, the Major replied. Long enough to analyze the intelligence patterns, interview key personnel, and hopefully identify the source of the leaks. You'd work directly with our best analysts and have full access to classified information. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Maria, Alpha Team will support whatever decision you make. You've already done more than anyone could ask. If you want to go home to San Antonio, we'll understand completely. Maria looked around the mess hall that had become her second home, then at Jake's face, which showed both concern and hope. She thought about the 12 elite warriors who had become like family, and about other teams facing similar threats across the region. The soldiers who were killed when the base was attacked, Maria said slowly. They had families back home, people who loved them. If I can help prevent other families from going through that law. Colonel Harrison nodded gravely. Your decision could save lives, Ms. Santos. There's no question about that. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I'll do it. I'll help you find whoever is betraying our people. The transformation of Maria Santos from cook to intelligence operative was about to begin, and with it, a deeper dive into a world of secrets and dangers she had never imagined. 6 weeks later, Maria sat in a secure conference room at the main coalition headquarters, surrounded by computer screens, classified documents, and the intense faces of senior military officials. Her transformation from mess hall cook to intelligence analyst had been remarkable, but the investigation had taken unexpected and dangerous turns. "The pattern is clear once you see it," Maria explained, pointing to the timeline she had created on the main display screen. Every successful enemy attack happened within 72 hours of a specific type of operational briefing. Someone with access to advanced mission planning has been systematically leaking information. Colonel Harrison studied the timeline with growing concern. Over the past month and a half, Maria had proven to have an exceptional talent for intelligence analysis. Her background in managing complex restaurant operations had translated surprisingly well to tracking information flows and identifying patterns in classified data. "The leak isn't coming from field personnel," Maria continued, highlighting specific dates on her chart. "The timing requires someone who attends strategic planning meetings at headquarters level, someone who knows about missions before they're even briefed to the teams that will execute them." Major Williams, the intelligence officer who had become Maria's mentor, nodded grimly. "We've narrowed the suspects down to 17 people with the required access level. All of them have been thoroughly vetted and have years of distinguished service." "That's what makes this so difficult," Jake Morrison added. He had been temporarily assigned to the investigation team, providing tactical perspective on the attacks they were analyzing. "We're talking about betrayal at the highest levels of the command structure." Maria had uncovered something even more disturbing during her analysis. The leaked information isn't just about mission timing and locations. Someone has been providing detailed personality profiles of key personnel, including psychological assessments and personal vulnerabilities. That's how they knew exactly how to target Alpha Team. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The security breach went beyond operational intelligence to include deeply personal information about the soldiers being targeted. It suggested a level of access that was both comprehensive and terrifying. Rahman al-Qassar specifically requested the mission to eliminate Alpha Team, Maria continued, consulting her notes. "According to the interrogation transcripts from the prisoners we captured, he considered your team the highest priority target in the region. Someone told him exactly why you were so effective and how to neutralize you." Over the weeks of investigation, Maria had developed a theory about the security breach that she had been reluctant to share. The evidence pointed toward someone she had grown to respect, but the pattern was undeniable. "I think I know who the leak is," Maria said quietly, causing everyone in the room to lean forward with intense attention. Colonel Harrison's voice was carefully controlled. "What did you find, Maria?" "The timing pattern matches perfectly with Captain Sandra Mitchell's duty schedule," Maria explained, bringing up a new chart on the display. "She's the intelligence liaison officer who attends all the strategic planning meetings and has access to psychological profiles of field personnel. Every leak corresponds to a meeting she attended." Major Williams frowned, clearly troubled by the accusation. "Captain Mitchell has been with the Intelligence Division for 8 years. She has an exemplary service record and high-level security clearances. Are you certain about this?" Maria had spent sleepless nights checking and rechecking her analysis, hoping to find an error that would clear the captain she had worked alongside for weeks. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "I've traced 17 different instances where classified information appeared in enemy communications within 48 hours of meetings. Captain Mitchell attended," Maria reported. "When she was on leave for 10 days last month, there were no security breaches during that period. The leaks resumed the day she returned to duty." Jake studied the timeline carefully, his expression growing darker. "Sandra Mitchell was the officer who briefed us on the intelligence situation in our operational area. She knew our mission schedule, our return time, and our tactical preferences. She could have provided everything Rahman al-Qassar needed to plan the ambush." Colonel Harrison stood and paced to the window, staring out at the base where Captain Mitchell was currently working in the intelligence center. "This is one of the most serious security breaches in recent military history. If you're right, Maria, Captain Mitchell has been responsible for the deaths of dozens of American personnel. The question is why," Major Williams said. "What would motivate an experienced intelligence officer to betray her own people? Money, ideology, blackmail, personal grudge?" Maria had been wondering the same thing. During her weeks working in the intelligence center, she had observed Captain Mitchell closely. The woman seemed dedicated, professional, and genuinely concerned about the welfare of American forces in the field. "I think we need to be very careful about how we handle this," Maria suggested. "If Captain Mitchell realizes she's under suspicion, she could destroy evidence or flee to enemy territory. We need to catch her in the act of passing information." Colonel Harrison turned back to the group, his decision made. "We're going to set up a controlled operation. Maria, I want you to continue working in the intelligence center as if nothing has changed. We'll provide Captain Mitchell with false information about a high-value mission and see if it appears in enemy communications." The plan was dangerous for Maria, who would have to maintain her cover while working directly alongside the suspected traitor. If Captain Mitchell discovered the investigation, Maria's life would be in immediate danger. "I can handle it," Maria said with more confidence than she felt. "Captain Mitchell trusts me and considers me a valuable analyst. She won't suspect that I'm the one who identified her." Over the next week, Maria participated in creating an elaborate deception operation. They developed a fake mission profile for Alpha Team, complete with false objectives, timing, and personnel assignments. The information was carefully crafted to be valuable enough that Captain Mitchell would want to pass it along, but harmless enough that no real damage would occur if it was leaked. Captain Mitchell took the bait exactly as predicted. Within 24 hours of the fake briefing, enemy communications intercepted by coalition forces contained detailed information about the supposed Alpha Team mission. The evidence was conclusive and devastating. The arrest happened during a routine morning briefing. Military police entered the intelligence center quietly and professionally, placing Captain Mitchell under arrest for treason and violation of the Espionage Act. Her shocked expression seemed genuine, but Maria had learned that betrayal often wore the mask of innocence. During the subsequent interrogation, Captain Mitchell's motivation was revealed to be a combination of ideological opposition to American military presence in the region and substantial payments from enemy networks. She had been recruited 2 years earlier and had been systematically providing classified information ever since. The investigation's success sent shockwaves through the military intelligence community and led to enhanced security protocols throughout the theater of operations. More importantly, it ended a security breach that had been responsible for numerous American casualties. 3 months after she had first stirred a pot of stew in a remote mountain mess hall, Maria Santos found herself in a Pentagon briefing room, receiving a civilian award for exceptional service to national security. The restaurant owner from San Antonio had become one of the most successful intelligence analysts in recent military history. But as she stood at the podium, accepting congratulations from senior officials, Maria knew that her real reward was simpler and more personal. Jake Morrison and the rest of Alpha Team were alive, serving safely in the field, protected by the enhanced security measures her investigation had created. The cooking could wait. America needed people like Maria Santos, who understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the people you care about. Her story had become legend in military circles, proof that heroes come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the person stirring the pot in the kitchen might be exactly the person you need to save lives and serve justice.